What do you mean you can't tell me? If you don't want to be with me, just say it already. Damien's voice wavered, his frustration evident as he paced back and forth. His hands balled into fists at his sides, though he wasn't angry. He was scared. Something was off, and Eli wasn't telling him. Eli stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself protectively. The warmth of the summer evening did nothing to ease the chill creeping into her bones. The last thing she wanted was to hurt Damien, but the weight of her secret was unbearable. "Don't be stupid," Eli finally said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Of course I like you. Actually, I love you. That's why I can't tell." "You!" Damien stopped in his tracks, his sharp green eyes locking onto hers. The way he looked at her, like she was the most beautiful thing in the world, made her heart ache. If only he knew the truth. "If you love me, you should be able to tell me," Damien said, stepping closer. His voice softened, losing its edge. "Eli, please. I can tell something's wrong. I need to understand." Eli looked away, chewing the inside of her cheek. Her mind screamed at her to tell him, to just get it over with, but the words refused to come out. How could she? She had worked so hard to be seen as who she truly was, to create this version of herself that people, especially Damien, accepted. But what if the truth shattered everything? I can't," she whispered, barely audible. Damien sighed, running a hand through his dark brown hair in frustration. "Why not?" "Because if I tell you, I might lose you." Her voice broke at the end, her worst fear slipping into the open. Damien's expression shifted from frustration to something softer, something more painful. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her arm. "Eli, nothing you say will make me stop caring about you. I don't know what's going on, but whatever it is, I promise we can figure it out together." Eli swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. Could she really believe that? She took a shaky breath, gathering the courage to speak, but before she could say anything, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. What she wants to say is that she is actually a he. The words echoed through the dimly lit street, sending a wave of cold terror down Eli's spine. She didn't need to turn around to recognize that voice. Damien frowned, his expression shifting to confusion. "What?" Eli's stomach twisted into knots. This was not how she had wanted Damien to find out. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet Damien's. His green eyes were filled with uncertainty, but not anger. Not yet. Her breath hitched as he hesitantly reached out, fingers brushing against her arm. "You're a boy?" Eli couldn't speak. She didn't know what would happen next. Eli stared at her reflection in the mirror, her hands steady as she applied the final touches of makeup. A few strokes of eyeliner, just enough to enhance her almond-shaped eyes. A dab of foundation to smooth out her skin. Carefully, she placed her false lashes, letting them settle before blinking at herself. The transformation was almost complete. She ran her fingers through her soft, pastel pink hair, fluffing it at the ends. It had taken years to perfect her appearance, to master the delicate balance of femininity she longed for. Every detail, from her carefully shaped eyebrows to the light pink gloss on her lips, made her feel whole. Yet beneath it all, the fear remained. Would Damien still look at her the same way if he knew? Eli sighed and leaned back, momentarily closing her eyes. A soft knock at the door made her snap out of her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Alicia stepped inside, her long, dark hair cascading over her shoulder. She was effortlessly beautiful, something Eli had always admired. But more than that, Alicia was safe. The one person in the world who had never made her feel like she had to apologize for being herself. "You're thinking too much again," Alicia said, sitting on the edge of Eli's bed. Eli let out a small laugh. When am I not? Alicia smiled knowingly, but her expression soon softened. It's about Damien, isn't it? Eli hesitated before nodding. I don't know what to do, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I want to tell him. I should tell him. But what if I lose him? What if he hates me? Alicia exhaled slowly. I get it. I really do. But Eli, if he's the right guy, he won't hate you. And if he does, then he was never the right guy. To begin with. Eli chewed on her lip, looking down at her hands. She wanted to believe that. But experience had taught her otherwise. She had been here before, confessing her truth only to be met with disgust, anger, and cruel words that cut deeper than any wound. The taunts of her past still echoed in her head. Freak, liar, disgusting. She had worked so hard to leave that behind, to become Eli, not the name she was born with. But what if... Alicia cut her off. No what ifs. She reached out, squeezing Eli's hand. You don't have to tell him tonight, or tomorrow, or even next week. But don't keep this from him forever, okay? If you really love him, and if he really loves you, he deserves to know the real you. Eli swallowed the lump in her throat. The real her. She wanted that more than anything. But was she ready? She wasn't sure. Not yet. The bass from the music vibrated through the floor as Eli stepped inside the crowded house, Alicia leading the way. Laughter and conversation filled the air, and the warm glow of colored string lights illuminated the party. The place was packed. People gathered in small groups, drinking, talking, and dancing to the rhythm of the night. Eli adjusted the strap of her navy blue dress and took a deep breath. She had told herself that tonight would be fun, a night to escape her worries. Alicia had assured her that no one here would judge her, but that didn't mean she wasn't nervous. Relax, Alicia said, giving her a reassuring nudge. It's just a party. Eli forced a small smile. Yeah, just a party. Alicia winked before disappearing into the crowd, leaving Eli alone near the entrance. She scanned the room, suddenly unsure of what to do. She wasn't exactly the type to jump into conversation with strangers, and the thought of dancing alone made her stomach twist. Then, she felt his eyes on her. Across the room, Damien leaned against the kitchen counter, a drink in his hand. He was laughing at something his friend said, but his gaze was locked onto her. Eli's breath caught. He looked so good. Dark jeans, a fitted black shirt that hugged his toned arms, and those piercing green eyes. He was gorgeous, effortlessly confident, and completely out of her league, and yet he was walking toward her. Eli, he greeted, his voice warm, eyes twinkling with something she couldn't quite place. Didn't expect to see you here. Eli tucked a strand of pink hair behind her ear, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Yeah, my sister dragged me along. Damien smirked. Well, I'm glad she did. Eli's cheeks burned. He always had that effect on her. One look, one teasing remark, and she was completely undone. You look incredible, he said, his gaze traveling over her. Like, ridiculously stunning. Eli let out a nervous laugh. You're just saying that. I never just say things, Damien countered, stepping closer. You're the most beautiful girl in this entire house. Eli's heart pounded. This isn't fair. He doesn't even know the truth. Before she could spiral into self-doubt, Damien extended a hand. Come dance with me. Her breath hitched. I don't really dance. Neither do I, he admitted with a grin. But let's pretend we do. Eli hesitated for only a second before placing her hand in his. Damien led her to the middle of the living room, where people swayed to the beat. The music was slow, sultry, the kind that pulled people closer. He placed his hands gently on her waist, and Eli instinctively rested her arms around his neck. Their bodies moved together, the rhythm guiding them. The warmth of Damien's touch sent a shiver up her spine. She could feel his heartbeat beneath his shirt, strong and steady, while hers raced. "See? Not so bad," he murmured, his lips inches from her ear. Eli swallowed hard. "What are you doing to me?" The space between them disappeared, their bodies pressed together. His fingers traced small circles against her waist, sending electricity through her veins. She looked up, and their eyes locked. The world around them faded. Damien's gaze dropped to her lips, and Eli forgot how to breathe. He leaned in, slow, hesitant, as if giving her a chance to pull away. She didn't. Then his lips met hers. It was soft at first, gentle. His hand slid up to cup her cheek, tilting her face as he deepened the kiss. Eli melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair. It was everything she had imagined, and more. A fire ignited in her chest, her heart hammering as he kissed her like she was something delicate yet wanted, like he had been waiting for this moment. When they finally pulled apart, Eli's head was spinning. Damien smiled down at her, brushing his thumb over her cheek. "Wow." Eli's lips tingled, her mind racing with emotions. She had kissed Damien, and he still didn't know the truth. As much as she wanted to bask in the moment, reality clawed at her. What would happen when he found out? Would he still look at her like this? Would he still want to hold her? She wanted to believe he would, but she wasn't sure she could risk finding out. Eli woke up with a dreamy sigh, the warmth of last night's kiss still lingering on her lips. She stretched under the covers, a giddy smile spreading across her face as she replayed every second in her mind. The way Damien had looked at her, the way his fingers had brushed against her skin, the way he had kissed her like she was the only girl in the world. It all felt surreal. She had spent so long convincing herself that someone like him could never fall for someone like her. And yet, last night had happened. It was real. But then, like a storm cloud creeping over a perfect sky, doubt settled in her chest. He doesn't know the truth. Eli sat up, hugging her knees to her chest. What if telling him ruined everything? What if he never looked at her the same way again? A knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. "Elliot, breakfast is ready," her mother called. The name hit her like a slap. Her heart sank. Not Eli. Elliot. A name that never fit, a name she had shed years ago but still haunted her. She closed her eyes, willing the sting in her chest to fade. She doesn't mean to hurt you. It was just her mother's way of holding on, of pretending that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Eli took a deep breath, pushed off the blankets, and padded into the kitchen, where Alicia was already at the table, scrolling through her phone. One look at Eli's face, and Alicia knew. "You're thinking about him." Eli grabbed a piece of toast, nibbling at the crust. "He kissed me," she admitted, barely above a whisper. Alicia grinned. "And?" "It was perfect," Eli confessed. "But he still doesn't know." Alicia's smile softened. "Eli, Damien likes you. The way he looks at you, the way he treats you. It's real." Eli swallowed hard. "But what if it changes when he finds out?" Alicia reached for her hand. "And what if it doesn't?" Eli stared down at her plate, her heart torn between hope and fear. She wanted to believe in the possibility of love. But was she brave enough to risk it? The plastic grocery bags dug into Eli's fingers as she stepped out of the store, struggling under their weight. The midday sun beat down on her, making her wish she hadn't worn long sleeves. She hadn't expected the bags to be this heavy, and her arms already ached from carrying them halfway home. She adjusted her grip, trying to distribute the weight. But as she stepped off the curb, one of the bags twisted awkwardly. Her balance wobbled, and for a terrifying moment, she felt herself tipping backward. Then, strong hands caught her. "Whoa, careful there," a familiar voice chuckled. Eli's breath hitched. "Damien." She turned her head, heart hammering, and sure enough, there he was, standing just behind her, holding onto her arm to steady her. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, his dark brown hair slightly tousled, like he had just run his fingers through it. And of course that easy, confident grin that made her insides melt. I wasn't falling," she stammered, "just dramatically repositioning myself." Damien laughed. "Sure, let's go with that." He glanced at the overstuffed bags in her hands. "You always carry an entire grocery store by yourself?" Eli sighed. "It's a special talent." No, there's a much easier way to do this." Before she could protest, Damien took both bags from her, holding them effortlessly. Eli blinked. "You really don't have to." "I want to," he said simply. "Besides, this way I get an excuse to walk you home." Her cheeks heated. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, not from someone like Damien, not from someone she liked. This much. They started walking side by side, the silence between them comfortable. Every now and then, Damien would glance at her like he was waiting for the right moment to say something. Finally, he spoke. "I was wondering, do you want to hang out again? Just you and me this time?" Eli's heart stopped for a second before restarting at double speed. Was he asking her out? "You mean like—" She hesitated, afraid to say the word. "Like a date," Damien confirmed with a smile. "Unless that's weird. Then we can just call it hanging out." A date. A real date. Eli's mind screamed 1,000 worries at her, but none of them were louder than the excitement bubbling in her chest. Yeah, she said, trying to sound casual, even as her hands fidgeted. "That sounds really nice." Damien grinned. "Great. How about Friday? I'll pick." "You up at 7? Eli nodded quickly, unable to stop smiling. "Perfect." As they reached her house, Damien handed her the bags. Their fingers brushed for half a second, sending a spark through her skin. "See you Friday then," he said, giving her a small wave before turning to leave. Eli watched him go, clutching the grocery bags like they were the only thing keeping her from floating away. Holy crap. She had a date with Damien. Eli sat in front of her mirror, hands trembling as she smoothed down the fabric of her turquoise top. Her heart had been racing since Damien asked her out, and now that the moment was here, it felt like her pulse was a permanent drumbeat against her ribs. Alicia had helped her pick out the perfect outfit, a white flowing skirt that moved with the wind and a delicate necklace that shimmered against her collarbone. She had spent extra time on her makeup, making sure every detail was perfect, but no amount of eyeliner or lip gloss could quiet the nerves gnawing at her. What if tonight changed everything? The sound of a car pulling up snapped her out of her thoughts. He's here. Taking a deep breath, Eli grabbed her bag and hurried downstairs. When she opened the front door, she found Damien leaning against his car, dressed in a black button-up with the sleeves rolled up and faded jeans. The sight of him sent her heart into a tailspin. "Wow," he said, eyes sweeping over her. "You look incredible." Eli blushed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not so bad yourself," Damien grinned. "Ready?" She nodded, stepping into the passenger seat. As they drove, the sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the world. "Where are we going?" Eli asked, curiosity bubbling in her chest. "You'll see," Damien said with a playful smirk. After about 20 minutes, he pulled off onto a quiet, hidden road leading to the beach. When Eli stepped out of the car, the salty breeze immediately kissed her skin. The waves rolled gently against the shore, the sand cool beneath her feet as she followed Damien down a wooden path leading to a small, secluded cove. A blanket was already spread out on the wooden pier that jutted out over the water, surrounded by small lanterns flickering in the dimming light. A picnic basket sat beside it, filled with fruits, sandwiches, and drinks. Eli gasped. "Did you do all this?" Damien scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah. I wanted tonight to be special." Her heart swelled. No one had ever done anything like this for her before. They sat down, shoulders brushing, as Damien poured them both a drink. "So," he said, glancing at her, "tell me something about yourself that no one else knows." Eli hesitated. "You don't want to know the real secret." Instead, she offered a softer truth. "I used to hate my reflection," she admitted. "I'd avoid mirrors for years because I didn't like what I saw." Damien frowned. "That's hard to believe. You're—" He stopped himself, then softened his voice. "What changed?" "I did," she whispered. "I stopped trying to be what people expected." Damien studied her, something unreadable in his expression. "I think you're perfect the way you are." Eli's breath caught. "If only you knew." They talked for hours, sharing childhood stories, Damien's adventures climbing trees and scraping his knees, Eli's memories of sneaking into Alicia's room to play with her makeup. They laughed, teased each other, and as the night stretched on, the ocean waves played a melody in the background. Then Damien's hand found hers. Eli stiffened but didn't pull away. "Eli," he murmured, turning to face her fully. "I need to tell you something." Her heart pounded as she braced herself for the worst. "I really, really like you." He let out a shaky laugh. "I didn't expect to, but every time I'm with you, I feel like I've known you forever. And when I'm not with you, I want to be." Eli's breath hitched. He was looking at her like she was his favorite person in the world. Before she could respond, Damien cupped her cheek gently, his thumb grazing her skin. And then he kissed her. It was deeper than the one at the party, slower, more certain. His lips were warm, and the way he pulled her closer sent a fire through her veins. Eli melted into him, forgetting everything except this moment. When they pulled apart, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to mess this up," he whispered. Eli's throat tightened. He deserves to know. The truth clawed at her, begging to be spoken. But as she looked into Damien's eyes, filled with warmth and something dangerously close to love, she couldn't do it. Not yet. Instead, she whispered, "Me neither." And for now, that was enough. Eli sat cross-legged on Alicia's bed, hugging a pillow to her chest. The dim glow of fairy lights cast soft shadows across the room, but nothing could ease the tightness in her chest. "I can't do this," she whispered. Alicia, sitting beside her with a cup of tea in hand, raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" Eli swallowed. Keep lying to him. The weight of her secret had grown unbearable. Every time Damien looked at her like she was the most beautiful girl in the world, guilt gnawed at her. Every time he touched her, held her, kissed her, she felt like a fraud. It wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about trust. Alicia sighed, setting her tea aside. "Eli, you don't have to rush this, but I won't lie to you. If you want something real with Damien, he has to know. The real you." Eli buried her face in the pillow. "And what if the real me isn't what he wants?" Alicia gently pried the pillow from her grip and squeezed her hand. "Then he was never the right guy for you." Eli exhaled shakily. "But he kissed me." "Lice. He likes me." Alicia smiled softly. "He likes you. Not your makeup, not the clothes, you. Maybe, just maybe, you don't give him enough credit." Eli bit her lip. Could it be that simple? Could Damien really see past it all? "What? If he gets angry?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Alicia's grip on her hand tightened. "Then let him. You deserve someone who loves all of you. not just the parts they understand. Eli nodded slowly. For so long she had fought to be seen as who she really was, but keeping this from Damien was like hiding herself all over again. She didn't want to live in fear. She wanted to be brave. Taking a deep breath, she whispered, "I'm going to tell him." Alicia smiled. "I knew you would." Eli wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to find out. Eli's hands trembled as she sat across from Damien at the small cafe by the river. The warm glow of the setting sun reflected off the water, casting golden light across his face. He looked so perfect, relaxed, content, completely unaware that her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear anything over it. She had spent the past 2 days rehearsing how she would tell him, but now, sitting here with him, all those carefully practiced words felt like sand slipping through her fingers. "Eli?" Damien tilted his head, concern flickering in his green eyes. "You okay?" "No, not even close." But she forced herself to nod. There's something I need to tell you." He set his drink down, giving her his full attention. "Okay, I'm listening." Eli took a shaky breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Damien, there's something about me that you don't know, and I should have told you sooner." His expression softened. "Eli, whatever it is, you can tell me." Her fingers curled into fists on her lap. "This is it. No turning back." "I wasn't born a girl," she finally whispered. The world seemed to hold its breath. Damien blinked, his brows furrowing slightly as he processed her words. His expression wasn't one of disgust or anger, just quiet surprise. Eli's chest tightened. "I know this probably changes everything. I get it if you don't want to see me anymore. I was just so scared of losing you." Damien exhaled, slowly rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You thought I'd hate you?" Eli swallowed. "Most people do," he frowned. "I'm not most people." Silence stretched between them. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then, Damien reached across the table and took her hand in his. Eli's breath hitched. "I won't pretend I expected this," he admitted, his thumb brushing against her skin. "But you are still the same Eli I've been falling for. That hasn't changed." Eli's eyes stung. "You mean that?" Damien nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah. And, I guess now's a good time to tell you something too." Eli frowned. "What?" Damien took a deep breath. "I'm gay." Eli's heart nearly stopped. "You, what?" He let out a nervous chuckle. "I've known for a while, but with you, I was confused at first. I thought maybe you were an exception, but now it actually makes sense." A lump formed in Eli's throat. "So, you still—" Damien squeezed her hand. "I still like you. No, I still really like you." Eli felt a tear slip down her cheek. But for the first time in forever, it wasn't from fear, it was from relief. Damien smiled, pulling her into his arms. "You don't have to be scared anymore." And for the first time, she believed it. Eli had never known peace like this. She walked beside Damien through the quiet park, their fingers intertwined, the warmth of his hand grounding her in a reality she had never dared to hope for. The streetlights cast a soft glow over the path, and in the distance, the sound of crickets hummed in the night air. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. Damien gave her hand a gentle squeeze, glancing at her with that soft, knowing smile. "You're quiet." Eli exhaled, shaking her head in disbelief. I didn't think this would ever happen. That someone would actually—" She hesitated. "See you?" Damien finished for her. She nodded. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I see you, Eli. I always have." The weight of those words made her chest tighten, but in the best way. All her life, she had been waiting for someone to accept her, to love her, to just understand. And here he was, standing in front of her, telling her she didn't have to wait anymore. Damien reached up, tucking a strand of pink hair behind her ear. "I'm with you, no matter what." Tears welled in Eli's eyes, but she didn't fight them this time. She didn't have to hide anymore. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "This won't be easy. People might not understand." Damien let out a soft chuckle. "People barely understand anything as it is, but I know what I want. And I want you." Eli let out a watery laugh. "You're impossible. And yet, you're still here," he teased, his eyes glimmering with mischief. Eli rolled her eyes, but before she could respond, Damien cupped her face in his hands, tilting her chin up, and then he kissed her. It was slow and deep, a promise, wrapped in warmth. Eli melted against him, her arms winding around his neck, pulling him closer. It wasn't just a kiss, it was freedom, acceptance, love. When they finally pulled apart, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "So, does this mean you're officially my girlfriend now?" Eli laughed, wiping at her eyes. "I think so, yeah," Damien grinned. "Good, because I plan on showing you off." She playfully smacked his arm, shaking her head. "You're ridiculous. But you like me anyway." She smiled. "Yeah, I really do." Hand in hand, they kept walking, the night stretching ahead of them. The future was uncertain. But, for the first time, Eli wasn't afraid of it. She had Damien by her side, and that was enough.